Next big person on my list is Augustine, or people say Saint Augustine, or they say Augustine, or they say Saint Augustine. All different ways of saying the name of the same guy. He's called Augustine of Hippo or Augustine of Hippo. He's from North Africa. He lives about 100 years after Christianity becomes the official religion of Rome. So add 100 years to Constantine's time when Rome is falling. Okay, and he lived literally during the fall of Rome, wrote about it. He writes in his Confessions, he writes basically the story of him becoming a Christian and all of the different struggles he had. And in Confessions, he makes it clear that the biggest struggle he had was with the problem of evil. And Augustine's makes a philosophical leap forward on this problem of evil that was really important. It didn't completely resolve it, but his question was not really ours today. The problem of evil, as I presented it, and as probably Epicurus presented it, was just how could evil exist and God doesn't prevent it or stop it? How could if you or I saw someone that was going to murder a baby, we would just try to prevent that. We would try to stop because that's bad. And since God is all powerful, He knows about it every time it happens before it's going to happen, and He could prevent every single baby from being killed and all these atrocities. We criticize, say, Sweden because they were neutral in World War II and neutral on D-Day. And, who fought the Nazis? It was the Allied forces, mostly the British Empire, the United States, and the Soviets. That's who fought the Nazis, okay? And we see it as like, you're bad. Sweden, you were neutral on D-Day. You could have been there. Sweden, what were you doing neutral? You can't be neutral against the Nazis, right? Important point for us is that's how the problem of evil works in our thought a lot of times today. It's like, why doesn't God do something why does God allow it? But Augustine's, in Confessions, his whole thing is quite different. He's like, what is it? What is evil? Is it a thing that exists? What is it? How can it exist and God exists? Because God is this perfectly good thing, so what is evil? And it's a whole other philosophical question. But the terminology that that's applied to what he was talking about is evil is a privation of the good. It is not a separate entity in itself. It is a privation of the good. So, this is an argument regarding the problem of evil that sometimes people make. And it's really, I don't think it's really much of a modern argument. I read it in the Book of Mormon before. But, I don't know if anyone really takes it seriously because it has philosophical problems. But sometimes people make the mistake of saying that, good can't exist unless evil exists too. And a good God can't exist unless an evil God exists. So the devil is, can't ever be destroyed because God would have to exist. God would have to be destroyed. And it's like, well, why do you say that? Well, they reason like this. They say goodness is defined as the absence of evil, and evil is defined as the absence of goodness. And so you can't have one without the other. They're like two sides of the same coin. If there was a movie where Tim Curry played the devil, and it's got Tom Cruise in it, it's called Legend. And as they're banishing the devil by shining sunlight on him down in his caves, he's taking some girl and they get these magic shields or something. And it's Tom Cruise and these little, I don't know what they are, little gnomes, fairies or something. And they banish the devil. And it's Tim Curry, as he's being forced back into hell, he says that they're you can never get rid of me because you can't. And he makes this philosophical argument, which, being in the throes of death is not really a time to make a philosophical argument. I would just say ow or something. But anyway, this argument is flawed, and I'll see if I can lay out why, but it is relevant to the problem of evil, and we kind of have to talk about some a little bit heavy philosophy stuff to talk about the problem of evil, and some different kinds of things. But like, take for example an apple. Okay, an apple has, let's say it's a red apple. I know some annoying smart aleck person is going to say, no, there's green apples. Well, what about golden apples? Like, oh my goodness, I don't care about golden delicious apples. Let's just say it's a red apple, okay? Let's just say it's red, okay? Does it also have the property of not being green? Does it have the property of not being purple? Does it have the property of not being blue? Does it have the property of not being yada yada yada? Does it have the property of not being a tiger? And the thing is, this is what in metaphysics is called negative properties. And it's safe to say that the apple does not possess negative properties, because then it would have an infinite number of negative properties. And then like you run into all these problems, because now you would have an actual infinite problem where it's like, okay, what if I take away one of its infinite properties? How many infinite properties does it have left? And that raises all kinds of philosophical problems, and it fits better with our basic intuitions that like it doesn't have an infinite number of negative properties. It just has the property of being red. And so a thing is what it is. God is just goodness, and as Augustine put it, evil is just a privation of the goodness. But goodness is not like the absence of evil. Okay. So evil is not really like an entity that exists. And that gets into other questions, but that's enough for us for now. But that's really Augustine's contribution. And I'm just trying to give us a little bit of the history. And we've talked about some of this stuff. As you move into the 1600s and 1700s, you get atheists. Basically, modern atheism emerges, and it's not really taken seriously. It's sort of like there's a few guys who are popular, but nobody's really on their side until the French Revolution comes, and then all of a sudden, atheism is now a big political, cultural force. You had a few guys called the Theodices in the 1700s who were pushing for atheism, but then all of a sudden you move forward in the French Revolution, and their ideas are a big deal. And David Hume famously is one of these guys who puts forth the problem of evil as a serious objection to God's existence. And so what you get, I don't know how far back it goes, but you've got a long tradition of Christians writing responses on the problem of evil, and these are things called Theodicies. Theodicies. So what is a theodicy? It's literally just an attempt to explain as precisely as possible why God allows evil to exist. What God's purpose is in doing this. So it's not like, well, and this really gets to the point that we can really move things forward into the 1970s now. The shift that occurred in the 1970s was to shift away from theodicies and to simply make what's called a defense, or just, we might think of it as just an objection to the problem of evil. The thing about the problem of evil is that it is an argument against God's existence. As David Hume put it forth, it's logically impossible for God to exist and evil exist. And so, for Christians, for example, those are both key components of Christian theology: evil and sin, and a good, glorious God. And as Hume put it, it is logically impossible. There is no way that those two things can exist. There is no possible world where both those things exist. And since it seems clear that evil exists, therefore God can't possibly exist. That's David Hume's stronghold, and for a long time it was the atheist stronghold. In the real serious debate about this, And Christians for a long time proposed Theodicies, which were attempts to explain exactly why God allows evil, or what's going on there. The problem with Theodicies is that everyone you come up with has a flaw in it, or flaws. And so it's like no matter what you do, your explanation, you can poke a hole in every explanation for why God allows evil. And the shift that was made by he's still alive today, but the philosopher Alvin Plantinga in the 1970s was to say, wait a minute, the atheist actually carries the burden of proof here. As Christians, we don't have to explain exactly why God allows evil. We just have to say God could have a reason. And you, as atheists, David Hume's logical problem of evil says that there is no way God has a reason. Okay? But as Christians, we can turn around and say, and this is really what Alvin Plantinga called the free will defense, or just like, it's really just an objection to an argument against God's existence. Just like, you don't know that. You don't know that it's impossible for evil and God to exist. You don't know that it's impossible. You haven't. In other words, this version of the problem of evil, or what's called the logical version, that it's logically impossible. In that version, the atheists are taking on themselves a very heavy burden of proof. It's like they're trying to prove, like there's no universe where 4 plus 4 makes 25. Because that's logically impossible. There's no possible world. There's no world that could come into being where that's the case. That much is certain. But Plantinga's point is that God could have reasons. We don't even have to, like, in other words, like, even if it's a 99.9999999% probability that God, doesn't have reasons, all you need is that 0.00001%, and then it's logically possible. You know what I mean? So what he did is, we'll look at what he did, but he made this case, and since 50 years ago, the atheists have conceded the ground on this. So Christians argued for a long time in terms of trying to explain exactly why God allows evil, and then a different approach was made that's actually a more biblical approach, and then voila, que voila, the atheists conceded ground. So everybody's just kind of conceded ground on this, and it's like, yeah, we as Christians don't know why God allows evil, and every answer we come up with has a flaw, but God could have a reason, and you haven't proven that he doesn't have one. And then the atheists are like, okay, I guess you're right. So, okay, we're back to just the problem of evil doesn't prove anything one way or the other. And so now the question becomes, is there any good reasons to believe God exists? Oh, look, here's the moral argument. Here's the Kalam argument. What Christians are not doing is trying to demonstrate that evil makes God's existence likely or probable, just that it fails to make God's existence impossible or logically impossible. So what atheists did is they haven't completely dropped the problem of evil. They've just shifted over to this probability version where they say, okay, yes, it is logically possible for God to exist and evil to exist, but it's just unlikely. And so a rational person should prefer an explanation should believe that God does not exist, because it's more likely that God does not exist than God exists. So that's how things have shifted today. And the thing is, this approach is really the one in Job. You see, in the book of Job, all these really, really bad things happen to Job. And fast forward through the book, his really big shot rich friends come and they're like, this is karma, Job. you must have done something bad. And Job is like, I didn't do anything bad. Job's actually right. What karma is like a super, super oversimplified explanation for why evil exists. Or, why do bad things happen to us? Well, you did something bad. And it's like, that's not a biblical view at all. The biblical view is that it's more complicated than that. So for example, in John, I think it's John chapter 9, you have a young man who's born blind, and the apostles ask Jesus, Jesus is going to heal this guy of blindness. But the apostles asked Jesus, like, why was he born blind? Because he sinned or because his parents sinned? And you see, in Hinduism, the reason a child would be born blind is karma. Karma is everything. So you have, like, bad karma from a past life, and reincarnation is really intertwined with karma. So, like, if somebody lives their whole life and they're bad, but they're like a drug dealer, mob lord, and they never go to jail, never get caught, never get punished, and they die on top. In a Hindu view, they'll be punished in the next life. That guy will come back as a cockroach or something. So if you were born in Hinduism, you were born, blind. You must have sinned in a past life, and you're just paying. You're paying for that bad karma. Whereas Jesus says to the apostles, it was not because he sinned or because his parents sinned that he was born blind, but so that the glory of God will be revealed in his life. That God has a purpose in this that goes far beyond the simplicity of karma. And that's what Job's friends keep preaching to Job. And Job is like, no. So then at the end of the book, Job's disagreed with his friends, but he keeps asking God, why God, why God, why? Why God, why God, why? So then God shows up at the end of the book in the form of a tornado. And that would be terrifying. And out of the tornado, God speaks. And instead of explaining to Job why these bad things happen to him, God just asked Job a lot of questions. Like page after page of questions. And the point is something you have to think about. That's why we classify it as wisdom literature. The point is, I guess there's a lot I don't know, God. And so I don't know why God did this. I don't know why God allowed this. But since there's so much that I don't know, I guess God could have a reason.